funeral. So there was no funeral homes in Vacherie, I believe, at the time, and so embalming really wouldn't have been available, or maybe I don't know if it was even a practice at that point. But no, looking at other books like Leon Seidel's book and Arthur Bagnell's book on Vacherie, I think the practice at the time might have been that the neighbors would have been taking care of preparing the bodies, and distant family members as well. Bless you. The bodies would have laid in state and remained in the main sitting rooms of the house, flanked by candles and crucifixes. As I said, Jay was telling me in the front that Laura, 2 were in the main front sitting room and 2 in the back, and this was just the dining room display. And you know, we were talking who could they have been? Obviously, Stephen Sr. and his wife. You know, Stephen Jr. was at St. Joseph Plantation. It seems like Birchman would have been at the Wagensback house just because of all the reports of him being there until he died. I don't know whether they would have moved him to put them all in one central location. The Hubble Virginias would have been on the way to that location, so I don't really know her. She had sisters, and her mother and her younger brother were still at the house at the time, so there would have been plenty of family there. So that really only leaves you, of course, Florence was taken across the river. That really leaves you with Arthur Hubble and Marie Louise Trosclair as being the possibilities. And the theory there is that Arthur's and Eileen lived on the property next door in the Raymond Wagensback property. So it would have been convenient from one standpoint that they could have been there. And you'll see in the genealogies there that Marie Louise Trosclair was a great or granddaughter or grandniece of Elia Wagensback. So she would have been closely related to the family and possibly been somebody who would have been there. The practice, of course, was extended family and friends would have come to pay respects, soon drink coffee, bring food. And of course, at the time, the practice was to stay up all night with an all-night vigil. So somebody or everybody, I think, was supposed to stay up with the bodies of the deceased. Well, the funeral was held the next day, the next afternoon, and it was reported that 5,000 people attended. And it was a joint service for 7 of the 8 victims. Remember, Belfour hadn't passed away yet. And there was a separate funeral for Florence. The new church really was too small for 5,000 people. Those of you who attend and go there, last week was the first, I got to go to a Hubble family reunion 10 days ago, and that was the first time I'd been in there. I don't even know if you could fit 500 people in that church. It would have been tight. So for 5,000 people, it would have been pretty crowded out there in the surroundings. The bishop in the St. Philip Directory listed Bishop J.M. Lavelle, auxiliary bishop, coming in to preside over the Mass with Father Fontaine. At that time, St. Philip was under the New Orleans Archdiocese. It was also noted a number of local priests would have partaken in helping out on the service of this. So I listed some of the names that would have been in the different churches in the area at the time as like the candidates. From Arthur's book, Becknell's book, River Road Moments in the 1930s, the other point he made is that after the funerals, the bodies would, obviously, the whole family, and I guess at least the family, but the celebrants would all go to the graveyard and the cemetery and stay and recite the burial prayers with the priest. He said at that time, obviously, it would have been probably in French. Pallbearers would shove the coffin into the tombs, and everybody would stay as the sexton would brick up the opening and then plaster it up. So obviously nowadays, when we just leave after and wait for them to inter the bodies for the caskets, it would have been a much longer process. And so if you can think about it, there's 7 funerals of 7 people being buried. 5 of these were entombed in tombs out there in a pretty close proximity, if you're familiar with the back area. And the cemetery isn't exactly, it's a pretty good walk to get to it. So I'm assuming what happened is for them to put all these bodies in and wait through the whole process of bricking it up and all, it would have been a pretty lengthy process after a long funeral. So you can imagine in a 24-hour period, these people had gone from obviously being getting ready for this fair in joyful mode to sheer terror, then excruciating physical pains of witnessing what they did, as well as moving all the debris out of the way, then having to prepare the body, stay up all night, and go through with an afternoon funeral, and then stay on top of it. So it would have been probably the worst 24 hours of any of those folks' life. The thing that might get lost sometimes is that the tornado actually did strike a couple of other places. It did, apparently, there's reports it struck the First Baptist Church down in Magnolia area of Vacherie first. And then it also was listed in one paper as having destroyed 4 homes and some outhouses. Then the St. Philip Church, and then jumped across the river and knocked over the 2 big stacks at the Lutcher and Moore sawmill, and also raised the baseball field back there. And then I also read that they, and they might have been confused, but they said a sawmill in Garyville also got destroyed too. Some after effects, what happened then to the family as well. Jay had pointed out from information that they had is that the Haydels, most of the children were grown at that point, so other than Hilda, who was just shy of turning 18. So they were either married or on their way out of the house anyway, which then with Flora having the younger children, they would have moved into the big house at Laura. Once again, Raymond's family had already broken off into the other property next door. Angel's son, Haydel, had moved over to the St. Joseph plantation with her 5 children, and they were from the ages of newborn to 8 years old. Eventually, from what I could gather, looking at obituaries and such, they all appeared to have settled out of the area and moved closer to New Orleans, I think maybe St. Charles area. The Hubbles had been living on the property in a house outside of Raymond's home, but Eileen and the children, also another 5 children, but much older than the Haydel children, moved into that house as well. My grandfather, Paul, was the oldest, and he graduated from Jefferson College in 1927 with an education degree. He started in the St. James school system and then moved down to Vacherie in 1930. And about that time, his mother and siblings also moved with him as well. So they left the area shortly, within 10 years of the incident. Dr. Wagesback, I think most of those Wagesback children might have stayed in the area for a time, and then I'm sure some of them have moved out of the area, like most of the folks, I guess, in Vacherie have. He was listed as having been married 3 times and had 8 children, but he was a practicing physician for 47 years in the Knights of Columbus, I guess the 4th degree in the Knights of Columbus. And I thank Benjamin for that picture. And Mershman's fiancée apparently stayed in Vacherie. I don't think she ever wed, and was a teacher.
Never did. She was my teacher in school. She never married. She was engaged twice, so those were her fiancés.
Oh, really?
She had 2 engagement rings, I remember.
Oh.
Never married. They said she was playing the piano when the tornado struck, and she never played again.
Oh, okay, well.
We heard that at school.
Well, then there was reports of her dancing at the time, so I
Yeah.
heard that she really wasn't dancing, but she probably was probably more fit.
But she never married.
Dr. Fernandez was originally a New Orleans native, and he resided in Edgard for about 45 years. I don't know if anybody knows about this. I was looking for information on him and came up with him listed as a delegate for the Democratic National Convention in 1944. Dr. Julius Fernandez from Edgard.
He was state representative in Houston.
Okay, so he did. It was him, not his son. Other than a blurb here and there, I didn't really have to go see a whole lot. All 3 of his sons apparently became doctors, according to his obituary, and he was when he died, he was buried at the St. John the Baptist Church. Like I said, didn't have a whole lot of trust players. Father Fontaine was a pastor at St. Philip for 35 years. Died in Mourning in 1953, and a lot of people, I think Arthur Becknell and then Father Clarence told me that they remember him as being a very kindly priest, a real nice person. There's his tomb at St. Philip Church. Let's see if this will go back to full screen here. Now, and I'm sure a lot of folks from Vacherie who grew up around these folks can attest to this, but apparently all these survivors really never wanted to talk about it. Started asking questions. Either there was some I think that did, but it was just something that really never got talked about. My dad and his brother and his sister, they said that really it was just something that had happened in history, and they never really elaborated on it. But as you can imagine, as we talked about, the 24-hour period of what everybody went through, it was very traumatizing. So I'm sure a lot of them didn't want to bring it back up. Anyway, there was also some interesting incidents. Maisie Vacherie told her grandson that whenever the storms would come up, it made her really nervous. And I understood the Hubble sisters, the three Hubble sisters that were Arthur's sisters and still lived with Philip and Cecile Hubble Sr., ended up always getting nervous and praying the rosary when the storms occurred. Obviously, this is something that's been a very important part of the Vacherie history. It's like, many of you are interested in it as well, and it affected a lot of the folks in the community. And before we get to questions, there was apparently a commemorative service in 1974 where the Monsignor at the time mentioned, let us pray that God will spare us from a like disaster in the future, and that these souls are enjoying the vision of God in heaven. And I think even today is probably my interest in digging around and asking questions. I kind of got suggested by El New to maybe somebody ought to write a book on the subject or dig a little bit further into it. And that's kind of what pushed me into saying, all right, well, I guess I'll do it, because my great-grandfather being one of the victims, it's obviously had an impact on my family. And most of the people I can trace my relation to at least 7 or 8 of them, of those who were killed. So it very either closely related or distantly related.
And he only spoke French, no English. So although he was a kind man, we were always terrified of him.
Well, you should have been in the church we were in. Our Lady of Peace.
Deldo.
Yes.
In those days, they buried people in the ground, besides in the tombs, and you would throw a piece of dirt to tell them goodbye.
Well, there were 2 that were buried in the ground. Virginia Hubble and Marie Louise Cosclair were buried in the ground. Their tombs are actually, their graves are pretty close, I think in the same row, actually, or next to each other, out there in St. Philip. But that's an interesting addition. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you, David. It was a great job.
Thank you.
Very good.
Very informative.
Thank you.
Do you have a question in the back? Ms. Hubble?
He was from France according to the information. He was from France according to the information the St. Philip directory.
He was a missionary in his early days.
Okay. I think I remember reading that too.
The priest before him had come from France also.
Well, that's what I guess was good as a good French-speaking community. So.
I appreciate the work that you did on that presentation, great. And I have a picture of Marie Louise Cosclair.
Oh,
in the walk. Okay. It was a common thing to go to take a picture. She was a child about 8 years old. That's my first name.
I'll say that same thing.
Did you say you wrote a book about this?
No, I'm in the process of
Right.
partially. I'm trying to figure out if there's enough interest in it, and then the other part about it is just kind of what have I covered? Is there anything more that people are interested in finding out? Have I covered enough, or is it have I missed some things? Which I'm sure I have missed some things. A lot of what I've got is based upon, well, here's some of the sources, but like a lot of the newspapers and some of the articles that we've run here. And a lot of it, I talked about this in the Vacherie forum, it's a wealth of information, those who participate in it.